What do I need to disclose when I sell my house? It's a question so many people ask, and it's a very important question to consider and to get the answers to, because you can make your transaction more transparent, provide some ease for both yourself as a seller and for buyers with the information that you provide, and maybe most importantly, you can avoid potential liability down the road. So anyway, what do you need to disclose? Well, it does vary from state to state. Here in New York State, we do have a law that requires a seller to do one of two things. Number one is fill out the seller's disclosure of property conditions statement that your realtor will provide to you at the time of listing. Or if you choose not to do that for any reason, you're required to give the buyer a $500 credit at the closing. The form is very user-friendly. Most people fill it out. I think it does vary a little bit in different parts of the state, and sometimes your attorney may give you some advice on whether or not to fill it out. There are also some exemptions to the rule, and I'm not going to go into those in detail, but one example would be if you're a fiduciary, like the executor or executrix of an estate, you're not required to fill that form out. You can still do it if you want to, but you don't necessarily have to. So in addition to this seller's disclosure of property condition statement, which is a state requirement, there are also federal requirements. The one that really stands out that you'll need to know about is if your property was built prior to 1978, then you're going to need to do a lead paint disclosure by federal law. And all you're doing is simply stating whether or not you've had lead paint testing done, whether or not you've got any knowledge of lead-based paint in the property, and whether or not, if you've had testing done, you've got some reports that you can share with a buyer. Many home sellers have never had lead paint testing done, and they have no idea. So if you don't know, you just say you don't know. That's all that the disclosure requirement really calls for. Now, on the buyer side of it, you do have the right, by federal law, within 10 days of the acceptance of a purchase offer, to do lead paint testing at your own expense. If you choose to do that and you get results back, then you can interpret those results and move forward in any way that you see fit. But you have the right to test for lead paint if you'd like to. For any properties built after 1978, it is not necessary. That is when lead paint was not used any longer in the construction and remodeling of homes, as far as I know. So check into it with your attorney if you have any further questions. In addition to that, when it comes to disclosure, I would say the most common questions I get are, has anyone ever died in the house? I have no idea in most cases. People are born, people die, people get married, people get divorced. We just don't know in most cases, and it's not something that's required for a seller or a realtor to disclose. Another thing is murder in the house, suicide in the house. Did anyone ever live there that had AIDS or Ebola or some other type of communicable disease? Most of the time, we have no idea. But more importantly, just so you know, as a buyer and as a seller, if you're thinking about listing, those things do not need to be disclosed. If someone asks you that question and you know the answer, you can certainly tell them, but there is no disclosure law for those types of items, and they tend to be kind of hot buttons, and a lot of buyers worry about those sorts of things, but not required. So anyway, if that gives you some peace of mind moving forward, great. In addition to that, there are also optional disclosures. Here locally, we've got something called a property information form, and that one's really great because it answers a lot of questions for buyers that the regular seller's disclosure form does not. Things like average monthly utilities, things like whether or not you have any tax exemptions for your property, major improvements that you've done in the last 15 years. Here's where you get to brag about your house and tell people about all the great things that you've done to it. If you're on a well or if you're on a septic system, there are also other questions that you can answer. Age of the furnace, age of the hot water tank, age of the roof is also included in some of the disclosures. So here's a chance to tell people about physical characteristics of the property. Some it's required for you to tell, some it's not. Speak to your attorney or your real estate professional if you have any questions about what you absolutely must do or what's optional. Those are really the main disclosure points, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. by email, text, or phone call, and I will do my best to get your questions answered. Thanks a lot, and have a great rest of your week.